I guess a Jewish man simply died at a protest in Ventura County, California. At least that's the way the media is reporting it, as if he magically ended up on the ground with a hemorrhage and with blood everywhere. They're doing everything they can to avoid using the word kill, because in actuality, the 69-year-old victim, Paul Kessler, was killed. And so we pray for the repose of his soul and for his family. The medical examiner has ruled his death to be a homicide, seeing as he died due to blunt force trauma to his head after he fell backward onto the sidewalk during a physical altercation with a pro-Palestinian protester. Initial reporting said the victim was pushed. Protesters on the pro-Palestinian side were heard to be shouting Allahu Akbar, and eyewitnesses said they were extremely aggressive and were trying to incite reactions and responses from those on the pro-Israel side. And now there's word that Democrats in the House and Senate are quietly circulating to their colleagues a letter demanding the floodgates be opened to admit an untold number of Palestinian refugees, terrorists and all, I presume, because the Hamas caucus doesn't discriminate, right? Well, I don't know about you, but I have a bright idea. How about the Hamas political leaders living in luxury hotels in Qatar be forced to personally pay for the civilians of Gaza to be moved somewhere safe, not America, for the duration of this war? New reporting shows the three top leaders, Ismail Haniyeh, Musa Abu Marzuk, and Khalid Mashal, are worth a whopping $11 billion combined, while their people live in abject poverty. Republican Tennessee Congressman Andy Ogles is now sponsoring a bill to strip Qatar of its status as a key U.S. ally unless it kicks out the Hamas leadership, who openly called for a global day of jihad just last month in the wake of the brutal terror attack on Israel. According to the New York Post, in describing the results of a report from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Qatar, quote, provides Hamas with between $120 million and $480 million per year, according to the October report by the Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit that studies foreign policy. These funds benefit Hamas leaders directly through payroll and kickback schemes, and indirectly through social services and government operations that help Hamas maintain political control over Gaza, the report said, end quote. Now, if I had the congressman's ear, I'd tell him to add Turkey to that list too, given how supportive they've been of Hamas and in giving some of those senior leaders citizenship in Turkey and in allowing them to gallivant around their luxury hotels too. And for those of you who know America's long, egregious history of training and funding our future enemies, like how the Japanese general who planned the Pearl Harbor attack, he studied out here, and then we allowed top-ranking Soviets during World War II to have our blueprints and to tour our factories, well, then this tidbit from the article about Abu Marzuk may be interesting to you, because it says this political leader of Hamas has a master's degree in construction management from Colorado State University. Joining us now to discuss is Ian Haworth, the host of Off Limits with Ian Haworth. Ian, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So we know Hamas political leaders who were living the high life at luxury hotels in Qatar, but to know that they're pocketing so much humanitarian aid and using it for their own investments to make even more money through real estate and other business, it's honestly such a corrupt racket scheme that I'm at a loss for words to even describe it. What about you?
Well, the fact is terrorism pays, and it pays very well. This didn't start with Hamas. If you look at Yasser Arafat, he died a multi-millionaire because all of the billions of dollars that were sent to the Palestinian people went straight into people like him in his pockets, and now Hamas and all these other groups. The fact is terrorism pays very well because it works for them. They can basically rely on terrorism every single time they want to. They'll be then welcomed back to the bargaining table. They'll be sent countless amounts of resources, including cash, and then this cycle will continue. The fact is nothing is going to change until the West wakes up to the fact that this is just a massive, really con artist scheme to use violence, to use threats of violence to make a few people very, very rich and to keep the vast majority of Palestinians in a perpetual state of poverty so they can be used as part of their PR campaign. It's absolutely disgusting. And what's worse is the anti-Semitism at the root of this, where you can see the heads of Hamas who control the Gaza Strip living in absolute luxury in Qatar, billionaires, millionaires, and then people can blame the Jews for the poverty of the Palestinian people. It's absurd.
It really is. And also these same groups, like you're saying, they get all this funding because America, we just end up funding our enemies all the time. It's just time and time again. And I'm honestly very sick of it. And then we have these so-called allies in the Middle East. And I mean, what allies they are, Qatar and the rest, hosting them, you know, for example. And then they also try and say, oh no, America, we're on your side. But then they pay Al Jazeera to try and tamper with our foreign policies. I mean, on and on it goes. None of these nations are taking in the Palestinian refugees. However, they're going to try and bring them to our shores. But then again, what have we been hearing these last few weeks? The fear that through our open southern border, our porous southern border, that Hamas and Hezbollah agents are using that to infiltrate and to come here. I'm sure we already have plenty. Now the bright idea in Congress is to bring in so many more instead of sending them to Qatar, to Egypt, to some of our allies in the Middle East. I mean, what do you make of the fact that they want to bring these people that they cannot vet here right after such a massive terror attack that took the lives of 1,400 innocent civilians?
Well, it's no surprise, it's no coincidence that the same handful of people in the squad who were practically cheering on what Hamas did as resistance are the same people who want to import millions of people who are fake refugees. Like, the Palestinian people are not refugees. They are kept in a perpetual state of poverty and so-called refugee status by the United Nations manipulating the definition of refugee to keep people as refugees if they were away from their homes for 2 years rather than decades. I mean, it's all absurd, but all of this is part of the plan to destroy the West. That's really what all of this comes down to. That's why people want to import people from countries that openly hate the United States. At the root of immigration should be that you love this country. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I came here because I love the United States. I love the values of the United States, and I want to contribute towards the country. Every immigrant who comes here should have that central to their core belief system. And the fact is that people like the squad, people like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, they do not want that. They want people who hate the West. And that's why they're trying to bring in people from, the Palestinian territories. But you won't hear them talking about the Kurds or people in Tibet who are arguably treated far worse than the Palestinians and don't resort to terrorism every single time they don't get what they want.
I know, I was just hearing in Africa, I believe it was in Nigeria more specifically, I think the Darfur village, there was 700-800 young men rounded up by Islamic militants, just rounded up, penned in, and then just slaughtered. There's pictures of their bodies, there's videos of what happened to them beforehand. I mean, it's horrific, and like you said, we don't get the same protest, the same outrage, because like you said, they can't blame the West for that one, and so therefore they just ignore it. But then they pretend to be these great champions of humanitarian rights. Now, hopefully this little scheme they have to bring in, Palestinians here to our shore, hopefully it won't go through, because now even 20 Democrats have flipped on Rashida Tlaib, and they've now voted to censure her. We saw that just last night. The first time that the House tried to do this last month failed. Democrats all stood together on that. But in the resulting last few weeks, after hearing the rhetoric of Tlaib and the rest, 20 Democrats, like I said, decide to then flip on her and say, okay, that's too far for us. But what do you make of the fact that she has now been censured by the Congress?
Yeah, about time. I mean, Rashida Tlaib has been evil from the very outset, but it really is telling that people on the Democratic side are finally waking up to the reality of who she is. I mean, she's very honest about what she believes. In her office, she has a Palestinian flag outside of her office while accusing Jewish politicians of dual loyalty to Israel. She has a map in her office of Israel with a post-it note over Israel with Palestine written on it. She's worn T-shirts with the entirety of Israel's borders filled in with Palestinian flags and language. Like, she is yearning for the destruction of Israel. She's very open about that. And the tweet she put out claiming that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is just a call for peace and equality. Ask yourself how much equality there is for anyone in places like Gaza and the West Bank, and then ask yourself how much equality there is for Jews. Because there is really no equality for Jews in any Muslim or Arab country, and especially Palestinian territories. And the only Jews right now in Gaza since 2005 are the hostages that everyone has forgotten about. No one cares. These people in the streets screaming for a ceasefire couldn't care less about these hostages because they do not care about Jews. They care about the Palestinian people, but they only care about them insofar as they can push their own narrative. Because if they actually cared about the Palestinian people, they'd be screaming for the destruction of Hamas. Hamas is at the center of all of this evil. Hamas is responsible for the dead Jews, the dead Christians, dead Muslims in Israel, and they're responsible for every single dead Palestinian. And the fact that people are not waking up to that, yeah, they're censoring Rashida Tlaib because she's just overtly extreme, but there are countless more who are just like Rashida Tlaib and far worse, who are on the streets right now, attacking Jews, threatening Jews, calling for the destruction of the West. I feel like we all need to collectively censor them too, otherwise we are going down a very dark road.
That we are. And so lastly, before I let you go tonight, what we saw just the other day in Ventura County, California, and the way the media was reporting as if he just died magically, unknown causes, unknown reasons, instead of using the word kill. It's very similar to what we saw, I believe it was in Waukesha about 2 or so years ago. Remember, a car just drove through a Christmas parade, killing 6 as this is just the car itself just took off, and that there was no human behind the wheel. I mean, we see a similar passive use of phrases, of grammar here in these headlines, but I mean, how despicable is that, the way the media has reported on this horrific event?
It's utterly revolting and it's entirely anti-Semitic. If you look at how they report any single story where say, a black person or a person of color as a victim or a Muslim as a victim, the headlines are as detailed as possible, as specific and objective as possible. Sometimes they just make up details because it'll make the headline a bit juicy. But if a Jewish person gets killed, suddenly it's like the pavement or the sidewalk came out of nowhere and smashed him in the head. Like, people are talking about it's an altercation. They're making it seem as if he's not really the victim, or it's confusing as to who's the victim, who's the perpetrator. Absolutely disgusting. I think the media, the way they've covered this entire conflict, should be ashamed of themselves. And just another story in this particularly horrific chapter of media malfeasance, anti-Semitism, and really anti-West views.
Ian, as always, thank you so much for joining us tonight.